All right, so we have been looking at creating floats, and what I haven't showed you yet is sometimes an unwanted side effect of using floats. And here's what I'm getting at. All right, so let's look at where we left off. I have a section, and in this section I have an image that's that has some text that's wrapping around it. So there's a float on the image, and then the paragraph information is floating around the stitch. Seems pretty good so far. Well, notice that the image and the paragraph are inside of a section tag. And so in my document, I would like to give my section a color. So I'm going to give it a section background color, and I'm going to give it like a light gray. So I'm going to do a hex value E6, E6, E6. I think that's what I'm looking for. And let's see what happens when I reload my page. Well, shucks. Here is a problem. And sometimes this happens. Well, this will happen with floats, and I will explain why and how we can fix it. So my section, in my mind, should be gray all the way around my stitch, not just around the text, but the gray is just showing up around the text. Why is that? Well, what happens when an element gets floated is it gets taken out of the flow, the normal flow of the document. So in other words, when the browser floated stitch to the right, it was kind of no longer aware of it as far as this section was concerned. It was taken out of the normal flow. And so therefore, as far as the browser is concerned, this image tag height doesn't exist, and the browser only knows about the height of this paragraph tag. So this is kind of an unwanted side effect, because I really wanted all of this background, including this my stitch, to have this gray background, because that was all part of this section in my design creation. But the browser's creation was, well, you floated this image off to the right, so I'm no longer really aware of it as far as the section is concerned. As far as the section is concerned, I'm only going to make the section as high as the other elements, the elements that are wrapping around and are not floated also. So here's what we can do to fix it. And again, it's sort of a quirky fix, but it does work. So I'm going to put in a div tag. It can be anything. You can put a paragraph. You can put, I don't care what you put in it. I'm just going to put some weird dummy text in it for the moment. So let me go ahead and put that in here so we can see it. I guess you have to save first. So my weird dummy text is showing up here. Notice that the section is aware of the dummy text. This, in my mind, it's dummy text because I don't really want ABC showing, but this is so I can demonstrate this quirky fix for you. So the gray is as big as my paragraph and my dummy text. The dummy text is floating around the stitch, but still not satisfying that which I'm trying to demonstrate. So right now I'm going to, inside the div tag, I'm just going to put an inline style of, remember in our last video we did clear both. So I'm saying if I'm an element, I'm a div that's being asked to float around something, make me not float around something. And so by doing that, kind of what we did here with the footer. So by doing that, what we've now done is force the browser to be aware of the fact that there is this element that exists after the height of the image, because we forced this div to show up after, we force this div to clear itself of the float. So now the browser is aware of it, and therefore I've sort of, what's the right word, piecemealed, did a band-aid fix to my problem of having the browser not being aware of how big my section is. So now my stitch is also gray. It has a gray background, but so is this dummy text. So no big deal. I'm just going to erase the dummy text so there's nothing in it, and everything is still working out the same. My div is still exists there, and I can prove that if I go into my inspect element and I look here and look in my section, and I still have that div there, but because it's cleared both, even though there's nothing in it, at least I'm now forcing the browser to be aware of the height of my section. So that works. That's a thing. But I'm going to show you another way to do the same idea. And you can use this if you want. This can be a p tag. It doesn't really matter what it is. It can be a p tag. It's going to do the same concept. And that is we're basically jimmy rigging or handcuffing our browser into looking at this new element that has been, it's no longer floating. And so now we can kind of force the height of that section. All right, so now what I want to do is I want to look at something called pseudo elements. I'm going to do the same thing using this concept called pseudo elements, or this new property called pseudo elements that we haven't explored yet. And I'm going to use a pseudo element to do the same thing while I'm also introducing this concept of pseudo elements. So pseudo elements, if we read the definition in W3 Schools, give us the ability to grab just a single piece of an element. In other words, this says we can style just the full first letter of a paragraph, for example. It also gives us the ability to insert content before or after. This is what we're going to use, and I'm going to demonstrate it. So let's just kind of scroll down here and learn a little bit more about pseudo elements so that we can put it into place to fix our little quirky fix here. All right, so it says selector, and we use these 2 colons and then the pseudo element property and value. So let's look down here a little bit. I think there was one a little bit further down. Yeah, this is a good one. So I'm going to choose this. It says p tag : first letter, and then in the curly braces there are some styles for just the first letter of that p tag. So if we click on this, try it yourself, we can see an example of that being put into place. So using pseudo elements, it gives us the ability to grab just a certain piece, whether it be a first letter or first line, etc., and style just that one little part of the entire whole. So if you scroll down, you'll see other ways to do that. First letter. This is a good one. This shows an example of first line and first letter. So as your browser shrinks or grows, just the first line then will shrink and grow. And so I think it'll probably see it here. So as you see, this browser gets bigger, the first line is getting bigger, and as long as the first line is being rendered in that browser window, because it's changing depending on the size of the window, always that first line will be flexible and is receiving this pseudo element and the styles that are according to that first line element, pseudo element. All right, so super, not what I'm going to use it for, but that is a good thing to learn about in the meantime. What we're going to do is we're going to scroll down to this one called pseudo after. And so if you look at the example, it does, I thought there was another one. It says this is using a pseudo H1, and after the H1, it has this content and then a smiley GIF or GIF, depending on what camp you're in. And so what the after pseudo element does is immediately after the H1 tag, and in this case before the P tag, it's inserting this content. And so we're going to use this example, not the smiley face, but let's go back to our example here. So using a pseudo element, what we're going to do is I'm going to simulate this example here where we put a element, we kind of jimmy rigged an element after our P tag, and we cleared both in order for our browser to see the height of this section, even though we had a floated element in it. So now I'm going to erase that P tag. So I go back to my problem. This was the problem we're trying to solve. And so I'm going to utilize the pseudo element P : and after. So the idea here is after the P tag, which is very similar to what we did here. We had a div, remember. So after the P tag, I'm going to put some content. And in this case, we'll do like we did the first time where I'll put A, B, C, D. So let's just do a piece at a time. So now I'm going to refresh, and we can see that the A, B, C, D was put what we call inline. And inline is a display property that says I am just going to go right after the last thing that was entered in the HTML. I'm going to go right beside of it. And what we're going to say is display. So that was inline, the inline property. That's what's happening here. So nothing's going to change because this is display inline. Oop, display, what did I do? Display inline. Oh, forgot my semicolon here. Got to put semicolons. There we go. So display inline is exactly that, right after whatever was last. In other words, right after the P tag, inline, on the same line, put some content. But we're going to change our display from inline to block, which says, similar to creating a new paragraph, instead of going next to the same line, in the same line, inline, create yourself as a block. So you're going to come after. So now you can see that it's kind of made a line return, like you hit the enter key on the keyboard, and it's coming afterwards. It's also done that here, which isn't really, we really didn't need it here, but what we need it is going to be right here. So I've created some text that comes after my the paragraph that I want. I have some dummy text, which is just like down here we did the div tag. And so now I'm going to do the same thing we did in the beginning of this example. I'm going to do clear both. And so in this dummy text, clear both. So if you are floating around something, do not. So let's see if that works. And so now we see the same effect happening where our ABCD is showing up down here. And therefore the browser is now aware of the height of our section. And now, just like we did in our example before, I'm going to erase the text. I still have to have this content here. I can't have this, like, I can't just make it go away, but what I can do is put at least an empty string in there, so don't put anything in there. And then I have the same effect. I have to save, and now I have the same effect that I had before, where I have, utilizing a pseudo class, I have kind of jimmy rigged or forced the browser to see the height of this section that I'm giving a color background to. If you're not interested in a color background, that really doesn't matter. But because I want to apply a background to this entire section, the browser was unable to see the height of the section once I removed the image from the flow, from the normal flow, by floating it. So now I have to kind of bring back the height to the browser with this little fix. So a couple of things we've done in this video then. I've showed you how to fix this unwanted side effect of a browser not being able to see the height of a section, or it could be anything, of some kind of an element. If I'd made this a div, I would have had the same problem. So I have an element that the browser is not being able to see the height of because I have a element that's being floated. Now I'm forcing that either through a div down here that we created or some kind of element down here where we've created a clear fix where what did we do? We did a style equals, and then we said clear both. So we kind of forced it here. Or instead of doing this, what we did was we used a pseudo element to create some content after our paragraph tag, which is really what we've done here. And then we made it a block so that that content would be on the next line as opposed to inline. And then we put a clear both property on that element so that the browser would now know how high it is. So kind of a lot in this video, but that would be pseudo elements and a good reason to use a pseudo element when we're floating and having unwanted side effects.